What did I teach you?
You are Duke of New York. You're a number one.
I can't hear you.
You are the Duke of New York. You're a number one.
Peace. Peace.
What did I teach you?
You are Duke of New York. You're a number one.
I can't hear you.
You are the Duke of New York. You're a number one.
Peace, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me? If so, type it in the chat. Can you hear me? Okay. Just be making sure, because this thing be all over the place sometimes. Peace. I hope all is well. Okay, cool. Give me 1 second. Hope everybody's well. Anybody have any questions about anything before we get started? You know, a lot has been going on, of course. Cool. Can you briefly describe canon law? That's one from Rob. Can you speak on the advanced tech of Moorish Americans had? You mentioned lasers being shot via staffs. Yes. Canon law is that which usually comes down to us through what they would refer to as the Roman Curia. The Roman Curia was a set of ancient pagan laws, mostly administrative and arbitrary, mainly to inflate the bureaucracy to keep pompous senators in power. And it was used as a means to codify how Roman law was to be dictated to all of the subjects that were becoming more and more under the rule of Roman vassalship. You know what I'm saying? But we got to remember that initially, the initial thing that we refer to as Rome that came out of things like Etrusca and the Levant civilizations were already governing themselves under the precursors to those types of laws, and that they were already being kind of like done. But what they did was, because it wasn't their natural thing, like those Romans basically started out as a monarchy, basically. And then through that monarchy, they eventually set up what we would call a limited, like, constitutional monarchy. Then they went into a republic, right? That was run through socialist type, democratic type, draconian type statutes, right? And then it went back to a monarchy. Well, first it was the military protectorate in between that, and then they went back to essentially a monarchy, because Augustus and Caesar were two different titles, but they were titles nonetheless. They were consolidated under Julius, you understand, into one title. Thus, Julius Augustus Caesar, right, would be like saying Julius L. You understand? Because Augustus and Caesar were pagan titles of that state. But what he did was consolidated because they were going through a civil war and they had split it up into three because they couldn't manage the entire thing. And so they flipped a different tactic in the military to hold down, and then they would give it back, like you saw in Gladiator. And essentially they shut that down after Julius rose to power. And then that's what set in the era of the modern understanding that we have of Rome. You know what I'm saying? But prior to that, it was more of, again, it started as a monarchy. And those initial monarchs, came from being descended from those first class of people who were of the original Sabaean bloodline that these so-called Romans adopted and raped themselves into. You know what I mean? The other question was, can you speak on the advanced tech of the Moorish Americas? Yes, the advanced tech that we're talking about is all of the stuff, the modern stuff that we see about them with so-called Tartaria and things like that. That's more like the modern understanding of the technologies and stuff that were left behind that they had to figure out how to use, and thus how to reverse engineer to be able to use without the initial power sources that powered these things. You know what I'm saying? So they had to come up with new ways to use stuff that was meant to work on ether and make it work on gas and steam and shit. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like they had to basically do away with all of that, all of the real stuff, and then replace it with that, while taking the real stuff and then striving to upgrade it by bonding themselves with non-physical entities that would give them the inspiration to help produce more of what they feel is our technology that they can't really use us to do, but it's inherently within us to be able to do it. One time I was talking to Bobby Hemmett, peace to him, and he was talking to me about how somebody told him a story about this bum who was outside of walled off of one of these buildings, and all of a sudden, he's a wino drunk black man on the street. So somebody from upstairs needed somebody like him, and they brought him upstairs to their little room, and then to their suite. And in the suite was all of these tech people with this giant machine. And allegedly, he, being a drunk, being the original man, had no idea what it was. But what he said was, I didn't know what it was, but I knew how to fix it. And they said that he walked over to it, fixed it, did whatever he did to it, fixed it, and then they gave him some wine and then left. And then he left. You know what I mean? Like, we think that's absurd. Like, oh, that could never happen. Why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't it happen like that? Because we intrinsically have the DNA to fuel and make all of these things happen. Why do you think melanin is such a big price, and why they need so much bread to so much melanin to produce these machines? Understand? They don't get it. Like all of this stuff that we're dealing with is dealing with how they essentially or inherently are using what we have not only forgotten how to use, but have since forgotten that we had the ability to use it. See what I'm saying? Because we caught up in the details. We caught up in trying to prove to everybody who was who and where we was at and all this other crap that has nothing to do with where we are now. See, the problem is the Moors are the only ones with a prophet that came to them, you know what I mean, and told them the science on who they were. You know what I mean? And specifically gave them instructions on how to to repent and refine themselves, you know what I mean? And then take control of their nation state. Their theocratic Salic monarchy demonstrated as a religious body politic and corporate. You understand? Then thus the republic using the democracy as a means to do business through or whatever externally. You know what I mean? And those Moors, we Moors, right? Whether you want to accept the prophet or see the prophet as the prophet, whatever the issue is people have with him or without him, that's not my thing. That's between them and him, right? They are also in a position to reflect on the fact that this prophet was able to foresee why we had to be woven in the very fabric of what America is, while we were being bombarded with the opposite understanding of us being imported and thus being under the jurisdiction of not only the white man, but the so-called Africans that have more power over their own to then ship us over here to then what, be raped by white people. This is the story now. To be then raped by white people to then no longer look originally like American, like Africans, to then look like this, to then have no culture, yet we created jazz, rock and roll, the radiator, the the steam engine, the light bulb, the you know what I'm saying? All of these things when we're supposed to be slaves, can't read, can't write. So all of this so-called history just really not only doesn't make sense, but it creates a paradoxical view of who and what we are in the now, in the natural sense now. Because you guarantee if white people found out that they have ancestry that allowed them to take control of certain aspects of land titles, things like that, really think they didn't do that? They wouldn't do that. They already did that. And they did that because they had the help of people like us that was willing to give them their titles to be able to do that to us, to them. They enslaved their own people to this myth as well. But now what's happening? We've been out here banging on them so much all of these years. Now what's happening? You got all of these so-called native born, original, autochthonous born, so-called original people, right? Who, whether they declare themselves Moors or not, are now rejecting wholesale the whole myth about being imported from somewhere else. When the import and they talk about was basically relabeling one part of the country, another part of the world, and then shipping you to that place and then talking to you as if you wasn't from where you was actually from. We saw that in the movie 12 Years a Slave, right? We saw this. Like they made movies about this and showed us how they did it. So what are we talking about? If Harriet Tubman was allegedly imported African, was first generation or whatever born here, how she knew how to get all throughout the lands that she allegedly was not from? If I dropped you in Ghana right now, just left you and said, okay, find your way back to the airport after driving you from the airport, I could leave you 15 minutes away. You probably still couldn't find me. I'm exaggerating, but you understand what I'm saying. You know what I mean? Yes, that Roman Curia, which fossilized itself as the Constantine type Christian, then made war with all the other versions that was already around, the Nestorian warlike Christians that was already around, right? That wasn't with all of this pagan stuff that they kept trying to infuse into it. And thus that led to a war between the Arianus Afris Empire, aka the old Moorish Empire, named such for Arius, who stood against the whole Council of Nicaea and all that other type of stuff, which basically was throwing a wrench in them trying to reconsolidate the pagan Roman Catholic Church into the new version, in which now the pagan god, instead of Apollo, is going to be Iosus, Yeshua. You know what I'm saying? This is why eventually it gets to a part where it gets too much for the two ideas to relate to one another. So they have to eventually split, and then you get the split between the Eastern Roman Empire and you get the Western Roman Empire. You get the Latin speakers, and then you got the Greek speakers. But the Greek speakers is they're called Byzantines or Byzantium because the original town that the original Moors and them took over was called Byzantium when it was under Macedonian rule, or so-called Crete or Greek rule, right? And then those people that was already there, you see what I'm saying, they eventually get absorbed by those people, again, of the Osmanali lines that's coming from over here and mixing with those descendant from them from over there. And then they collectively by 453 shut the whole thing down. So Rome is officially shut down 1453. But the Holy Roman Empire is still in effect. Why? Because that's filled up with Moorish nobles. You see what I'm saying? That have multiple houses in different regions of the empire. Over here, over there. But all of those estates that you see over there in Europa and Bavaria and all of that, of those original people that's dressed and look like us, that's because that's what they are. It's us from over here going over there, establishing everything as such, because we were the ones to be first, like I said, raised out of the Younger Dryas period when all of this stuff came and was when they was all still basically having to live underwater and all that shit. Excuse me, at the base of the volcano, base of the volcanoes like Vesuvius and all of that. Somebody had to go and re-dig these peoples out. You know what I'm saying? And thus they became known as the gods in these other people's cultures. Read about the Western African mystery system, god system. They said that their ancestors came to them from across the water, the gods, and taught them how to fight, how to fish, how to do all of this stuff. And they gave them certain songs and stuff to be able to vibrationally tune back into, their ancient peoples, which means that they had a distinct identity, which means back then everybody knew basically who was who came from where. But like I said, once certain types of the new versions of Christianity that's now caught up with the ideology of the decoy gods, the mystery gods, right? These gods that's used by the mystery systems to create, or descending out of the mystery systems that create the confusion through the modern day so-called temples and secret societies and stuff like that. But again, our prophet came at a time when all of that got shut down. So when you go to other parts of the world, you see these types of headdresses and these types of people. We're supposed to believe that initially, yes, they're indigenous to those places in the context that anciently there were people like the Grimaldi and the Kennewick man and the Cheswick man and these types of men and the Peking man and all these types of different versions of the Asiatic original man in these places. Yet after a certain period, after the Great Deluge, there was a massive group of people who came from those continents or descendant of that, who took those nods and went back to inseminate and seed all of these other cultures that were now coming out of the dirt. Then once those cultures up off the ground, dug out, whatever, they then leave descendants through the bloodline who become the royalty. Then that royalty, real royalty, then goes back to the ancient homeland, which to us is here, the promised land. And thus they become descendant of the gods who came from heaven. That's us. That's why we affect the world culture the way that we do. Why would somebody like a Chinese person give a damn that what a stateless so-called Black American that's supposedly educated, government sanctioned, in jail, don't have nothing? Why would they care what we think? Why would the premier official in charge of the Israeli intelligence and these people say that the so-called biggest threat to the Israeli government and these people is the original young people, so-called African American males and females in America? Why would they care? Why is it, if you have nothing to say, why is the whole birthright citizenship revolving around you and people getting all of a sudden all of the stuff that they did to your ancestors in the past 80 to 90 years is now being done to them, and then we not stepping up for them the same way they didn't step up for us? Why is it a problem for us not doing that? Why does our vote count more than everybody else's vote when it comes to who's going to run the country and who's going to do this? Why do they have to pander to the so-called Black vote if they don't have no money, no culture, no nothing? Why is it that everybody who comes over here from these other dirt countries with no infrastructure, real infrastructure, that has been bleeding their own people for 80 to 70 to 80 years. Why did they come over here, emulate our culture, put on the way that we act, we dress, we talk, we drink, you know what I'm saying? All of that. Then when they reach a certain level, the first thing out their mouth now, when they start receiving accolades from the same decoy fake governmental agency that they probably work for, first thing out their mouth is they don't, black people, black kids don't have no culture. What? This is not a isolated thing. This is a long-term ideology that all of these so-called races have understood. So by product of us awakening, it is also creating a proportionate effect in them. Because now they have to accept the fact that if we do have our own identity, if we are really the real Americans, right? Whether Moorish American, whether you decide to be Moorish American, whatever. Once you decide that you're not imported from anywhere other than where you're originally from, which is here, then that becomes an issue. Now everybody's money. Look at the Essence Fest. The whole Essence Fest was run by scammer Nigerian and Kenyan people, right? That's been exposed. Then those same people who did that is also the people responsible for the other scam they did with the black culture. It escapes my mind right now, but it's another one that they did, right? But who put them in play for that? The so-called American black bule. Alley-ooper to the African, right? The African come in and then he alley-ooper to the white man. The white man alley-ooper to the Asian alley-ooper to the Indian. That's how it worked. Then they all alley-oop everything to the Jew. That's how it worked, right? So once we understand that we have to be exploited in order for all of these people to make money, now it becomes a different thing. And now it flips because they had already trained you through Public Enemy and all of these other groups all these years that you're not from here, that you have some sort of place in Africa to be, that you'll be able to go and live in the Wakanda that they set up for you over there. And all you're finding out is that they offering the so-called white European people citizenship at a discount when they charging you full and sometimes upper rates because they don't see you as nothing but money. That ain't the white man making them do that. That's them doing that because that's how they see us, because that's how they've been taught to see us. Because let me tell you something. When these Africans tell you that you don't have no culture, next time they say some shit like that to you, ask them how far generationally they can trace their shit back. Most of these young niggas have rejected all of that shit. They don't know where they come from, what tribe they really from, because most of them was moved from the beginning. So it's not like the Rwandans that's in Rwanda today are the same Rwandans that was there in 1982. It's not true. Everybody over there been moved. Everybody over there, relatives been slaughtered and all of that, right? Everybody been messed up over there behind that shit. So these niggas don't know where they come from like that. You know what I'm saying? Like they don't have no, they are no more connected to their so-called identity than the so-called average original person, other than maybe their parents speaking their native tongue amongst themselves. But when they come here, first thing they do is try to assimilate into that because that's how it is here. Period. That's how it is. Look at all of the drugged out, degenerate, drill Chinese rappers they got out there, Mexican rappers they got out there. These niggas call themselves niggas like that. Like, who's sanctioning that? We never did records where we was calling ourselves Bato and all of that. But from Kid Frost days, they was making low-key racist songs about setting themselves apart from the darkies from the rest of us with songs like La Raza and all of that. And I like Kid Frost. I like them types of dudes. Mellow Man Ace, like I listen to all that shit. If it was cool back then, because I wasn't a separatist. You know what I'm saying? If it was good, it was good. It had nothing to do with necessarily where they was from. You just understand that you can't expect somebody from down south to sound like you in your region. And that's when New York fell. Because New York wanted to make it where everybody needed to sound like New York. And that's impossible. That's crazy. And so once they realized that they could box these niggas out and make them not love their culture, they set up Puffy and Jay-Z to basically nuke it and destroy hip-hop. So that way it would never go back to real hip-hop and music and real rap and all that. He deaded that. And they use these two niggas to do it. And there's never been anybody really big since them out. And when they do come close to that, they take them out of here. Because that's their culture. Understand? That's how they're raised. That's their culture. That's how they live. So like I said, we as Moorish Americans, we already had our own stuff laid out for us already. The Prophet just consolidated and put it to the proper place where everything needed to go. And ever since then, everybody been trying to cast stones and try to come up with all these different things. When I was here, 10 to 20 years ago, the same people writing books and all of this stuff about the Prophet didn't even know about Moors or nothing. All of these people are new. Most of these people are new. They don't really understand the journey it's taken for you to be able to come online, type in Moor, and actually see melanated people. It's our work that redistributed that in the algorithms populace, where you can't just go out and say Moors is white people no more. Because when they did that, we clarified that to such a degree that North African and Northwest African, Southeast, and all of that had to be redefined because of the constant bombardment people like myself and other Moors on YouTube, as well as in the real world, continuously did. So it goes from these phases of us Moors not being from America, the Moors being from America, the Moors enslaving everybody, the Moors freeing everybody. They don't do this to no other group. Why? Because the Indians wasn't that interesting. Weren't that interesting. Like the so-called Indians that you talking about, again, were Moors. You know what I'm saying? Like, we gotta look at it for what it is and not for what we want it to be. And the fact that one second. The fact that so many people have so much problems with you just identifying with something that they supposedly see don't exist. You know what I'm saying? That's not supposed to really, it don't make sense. Why make videos? Why go so hard? Why strive to just always want to make it and then want to reduce Moors to being one thing? If it ain't, oh, they was only from Spain, these new niggas is staying. It's, oh, well, they wasn't Spain. And then you show them, okay, well, there's a map of Spain here in America. So what does that mean? Oh, well, those maps was drawn by people who wasn't. Like, they constantly moving goalposts for something that they say that they don't agree with or believe in. So it gets to a point where it says, well, things that I don't agree with, I don't always feel the need to go and exploitatively go at people or what their ideas for or whatever, especially if I feel that it's trivial or not real. I, as a sane person, keep it moving. The fact that people want to constantly find and come into reasons why and all of that shows you, because like I said, these same people 10, 15 years ago, they didn't even know what Moors were. They didn't even know. So they want to refine it and bring it down to it either being a temple thing, it either being a religious thing, it either being niggas that's trying to get out of parking tickets and sovereign citizens and all of this crap. Oh, it's about taking houses. Like, that shit has nothing to do with nothing other than the actions of people who may or may not understand what they've involved themselves into. The real question is, if it's not so real and all that, why is there all of this congressional documentation to verify? Why is there all this historical documentation? Like, I've been showing stuff over 20 plus years. And they still trying to find reasons not to see any of it. So when it gets to something like that, you're dealing with somebody that's insane. You're dealing with people who are insane. They don't want you. It doesn't matter what's true or not, what you can define or what you can relegate to yourself. It doesn't matter. It only matters what they think about it. So why would you entertain or want to be around anybody who think? Why would you? You know what I'm saying? Why would you engage? That's why it doesn't make sense to argue foregone conclusions. Let them do the work. So long as the slander don't get too much, you know what I'm saying? And then it can't be about nothing personally, because this has nothing to do with me personally. Because we Moors, we know we're not out here trying to convert nobody to nothing. You know what I mean? If you're a real Moor, you almost urge people against it. Think about that. That's how I came into it. Like, you sure? This ain't all of this, you know what I'm saying? Because other people make it more issue with it than you. Because it's something that cannot be defined by this time period, by this timeline. It stands outside of that. They can't copyright it. They can't, you understand? They can't do what they do to other stuff with it. You know what I'm saying? Especially when you write. And they know you're right. But they know your people think you're wrong. And that's why they win. That is the hands shaking, the white and the black hands shaking, the black and the white checkerboard working together. That's how it worked. I've watched people. I've gone to the Secretary of State, Department of State building, all of that, given, you know what I mean? Seeing these people have to go get other people. Talking to the Asiatic can't really do it, so they got to bring the other white woman. White woman can't do it, got to bring the other man. They not telling, so you can't tell me that there's something not real with this. Because if it wasn't, they just say this is frivolous, get this up out of here. But they can't. Same with just like the Epstein thing, they can't do it. People not accepting none of this no more. You can't just say it didn't happen. You know what I'm saying? You can't just do that. So, like I said, when they talk about, okay, these niggas will tell you about Shaka Zulu, they'll tell you about Mansa Musa, they'll tell you about Pianki, they tell you about Narmer, they tell you about all these people. Ask these people about one American king outside of Montezuma. They don't know one. They don't know one. But like I told you, America was always a monarchy. It always was. Because it was given to us. You know what I'm saying? Due to our duty. And what we did was re-civilize the world, which brought into, like I said, modern world out of bondage. And we have prophets that came directly to us. Micah the Mordechite, the prophet of the Moors. This is from the book, The Light and the Truth. Right? This talks about how they broke up how the Romans was able to, after they conquer people, break people up into different quarters based upon their association and skin tone. Because it's also dictated what part of the world they could be in. Certain people with certain lighter or redder skin tones. But when I say redder, I'm talking about like Malcolm X, that type red. You know what I mean? Them so-called light-skinned red bone, them types. Right? We got the Mangroon, which is all black, full-blooded, right? Which is we get Mangroon, Mangin, Mandingo, right? Sambo, the 3/4 blood. Mulatto, the 1/2 blood. The Quadroon, right? Because this is all taking place during the time that they making people. So they breaking people up into that. Then finally get the mestizos. See? Is a 1/2 blood. Right? A 1/2 Negroes. That's why the mestizos got all the problems with the original people. That's why the mestizos was one of the first ones to set off the revolution that led to the Janissary and the Mameluke revolutions. And then the so-called white European Circassians were able to take control from them. The Niger, a Latin word, was formerly used by the Moors. See? The old Romans. See? The Moors and the old Romans, showing the designation to designate any black inferior object. This is why white people could be Negroes. WIGH people. This is why they could be listed as Negroes and white. Not every time you see Negro and all of that they was talking about Caucasian people. I mean, melanated people. A lot of times, more times than you think, they was talking about these Circassian slaves. Don't believe me? Get the book Forgotten Cause of the Civil War, which lays all of this out. Which is why that shit is like $3,000 now, if not more. Micah, the Moorishite, the prophet of the Moors, prophesied in the days of Hezekiah, king of Judah. See, we have our own kingdom in Judah and analogous to Judah. And spoke to all the people of Judah, who were the Moors, saying, thus said the Lord of hosts, Zion shall be plowed like a field, and Jerusalem shall become heaps. Talking about the fall of man, right? Micah showeth the wrath of God against Yaqub for idolatry. Yaqub being the 12 tribes, who were a part of the original experiments that led to the separation and the quartering of the so-called speckled cows that you read about in Genesis, in which, again, they were manipulating things to create other people that would serve them, because these niggas was lazy. And they wanted to, again, create homunculus vessels that these pagan things that they worship, who were disembodied spirits, could be able to inhabit. And they're still doing this today. This is every movie we saw coming up. How many times you remember there was always some sort of ancient dude who was modern dude who had money, who came across some manuscript, who want to open some door or open some portal or use some idol or animate some statue or sacrifice some people. Think about it. Think how many movies you've seen with that premise. Why? Because this is how they maintain. That's part of their society. This is how they make their society work. They sacrifice people to their gods, whether real or imagined. Look, the field of Jerusalem shall become heaps of forest. Go and look at Peru today. Go and look at Machu Picchu. Go and look at them places that's all supposed to be things. There's millions of cities and all that stuff there. Or isn't all of that a forest now? Is Jerusalem over there a forest today? Is Jerusalem and Tel Aviv in the so-called the middle portion of Africa? Is there any forest over there? And if so, is the whole of Israel a forest now, meaning desolate, gone? It's a desert, right? But people live in there, right? Right. So it's not a forest. So they can't be talking about that. They talking about us over here. Talking about Jerusalem down in Peru and all in what they call South America, right? Micah showed the wrath of God against Yaqub. The Mossad was built by the Moors in the desert of Paran in the land of Amalek, and was the ancient encampment of the Israel in the days of Moses. This Moses now is another title. Moses is not a name. Moses is a title, just like Augustus, just like Caesar, right? Moses is Moses, right? Like Moses or Amen Moses or what you call it Moses. He was from the dynasty, right, of those people of that time, you understand, who were of the Moses lineage, because he was mixed. He was half Hebrew and he was so-called Egyptian. But we just read right here that all of those people were Moors. That's what this say, right? Or considered that. In the Moorish War of Adel in Africa, right, some of the books of Moses were burnt. This is what led to the destruction of the libraries and all of that, and led to the first scattering. Moriah, a hill adjacent to Jerusalem on the northeast where Abraham offered his son, right? Okay, now hold that. This is one picture of Mount Moriah. Okay. And that is in Mexico. In the book Time Walker by Meredith Quinn, goes in all about the Moors in America and the fortifications that we had to protect the original so-called seeds that weren't necessarily participating in the Yaqubian experiment. This is what the Moorish War was about. Remember, I told you we went to war because of Yaqub and the stuff that he was doing with these tribes that was still wiping out and genociding all of the so-called descendants of Canaan, or the Hittites, or the Moabites, whom they say were horrible people because they were totally warlike and was sacrificing their people and all. Yeah, some of them were like that. And a lot of them held the Nephilim gene and the immortal seed and all of that from the pre-antediluvian world. Yes, they did. But a lot of them didn't. A lot of them repented. A lot of them wasn't with it. A lot of them tried to overthrow that and all of that. And thus, what led to the covenant of them joining up with those Israelites that also wasn't with what the Israelites was doing. Then you had another faction that wasn't what the Egyptians was doing. And so all of these factions had their own nobility and their own royalty, and they wasn't with it, and they went to war. This Moorish war, they say the War of Adel in Africa, some of the books of Moses were burnt. Moriah, a hill adjacent to Jerusalem on the northeast, right? That's us over here. Yes, in the book When Rocks Cry Out, it talks about that too. The appellation, Moriah, when Solomon built the temple on it, and it became included in the city. See, the appellation of Moor is given to those successors of Muhammad, pagans, Christians, Jews, who were extended their empire through where? North Africa. Where? South Europe. And the islands of the Mediterranean. See? The world. Because we know North Africa is here. Right? We know all that shit is all the way here. The Moors gained the highest reputation, both in arts and arms, of all nations of the East. The mechanic and fine arts, especially sculpture and painting, were in very low state in Europe when the Moors turned their attention to them and cultivated them with great success. See, we was doing so well, we forgot about Europe. They was in the icebox for generations until we decided, oh yeah, you know what, let's go try to upgrade these niggas. And then what? Started creating a class, a slave class, basically, to serve everybody. And that's where these genetic mutations was coming from. So when you read the Bible, the original Bible, all types of stuff is in there. Satyrs is in there, mermaids is in there, all that type of shit is in there, but they took all of that out. Because they want us to believe their version, their sanitized version of what it is, when it's more pagan than it is anything else. One of the earliest Bibles you could get is the Septuagint, right? Another early one you could get is the Geneva Bible. Some people would say you could find it in the Kebret Nagast. I would definitely look into the books of Enoch, the Book of Giants. You know what I mean? All the stuff that they discount because of their so-called rule system or their research identifies parameters is usually bullshit. So anything counterculture to that's why they don't accept the Apocryphas. But if you read the Apocrypha and then you read something like the Uva Pishtim, right? And then read that with the story of Gilgamesh, like you see, it's all kind of talking about the same type of people. There's a list of kings I'm showing you right here. These are a list of American kings right here. Right here, look. The appellation of Moor is given to the successors of Muhammad, right? Who extended their empire through North Africa. The Moors gained the highest representation. Boom. The Moors turned their attention to them and cultivated. The Moors have founded in Africa, right? Now remember, Africa is a code word for earth. Okay? Amalek and all of them were the giants. These are still half giant, half people, demigod people. That's why people like Black Panther or the Black Jaguar of the Osage Nation, what's his name, met him, says his father was 15 feet tall. Because these are the lines of the kings that they had to wipe out. And then they had to cultivate them and then turn them into these giants that we have amongst us today, like the basketball players and these types of niggas. That's how they were able to focus the energy of the line. You understand? But they all got that gene. The Moors founded the African Empire of Morocco, see? Which was governed by a viceroy named Musa, who sent his general Tarif into Spain, who in a single memorial engagement stripped the Gothic king Rodrigo, who was Roderick, of his life and crown and subdued the country AD 713, and the kingdom of the Moors flourished. Another thing, there's another book called The Secret of the Antilles, where it says that Rodrigo or Roderick was able to escape into the Antilles and set up the seven kingdoms that were there. Because Rodrigo and these so-called Visigoths or whatever, these niggas was Christians. But they were melanated, like quadroon mestizo type Christians. They were like mulatto quadroon Christians. So back then, that was like being white. You understand? Because they was the minority everywhere. You understand? So when people seen them, they seen that they are being a part of the new generation. Because the Moors weren't necessarily color restrictive. They weren't racist in that way. So long as you had merit, virtue, all of that, you were able to come up in the society. You understand? It's only when they found opposite of your nature, or you found out to be a trait or something like that, then you would go through the heavy restriction. But you could be a slave, a Slav, and actually rise up in stature to actually have a viceroy position somewhere. You understand? In the Moorish Empire, telling other dark melanated people what to do. Because niggas know if this nigga got to this position, you know what he had to do? We got to respect that. That's how we used to look at it. It didn't become a race thing, like I said, until that type of system was used against them. So look, the term Moorish as here applied to scarcely be, excuse me, regarded as deceptive in as much as the Montezuma, king of the Temistian of Mexico, which is subsequently designated a Moorish king. In this same inventory in 1596, right, he is listed as such. By 1613, it goes from it coming from that to a Moorish hat. Then by 1621, the word Moorish is substituted for Indian. Then by 1730, it goes to being an apron, right? Now they clown it, right? The apron being synonymous to the Masonic apron. Then by what? The late 1800s, it becomes an Indian hat. Why? Because they need to hide all of these people. Look at the dates on when these people was ruling. This is before Granada. All of this is before Granada. You understand? Granada was just the icing on the top. That was the interplanetary, interdimensional portal that everybody could go to. That was the problem. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay, cool. Yeah. No, we was ruling over these people. Ruling over everything. Sorry about that. Yeah, it's all going through the same course. So yeah, this is a list of kings, and you see it goes into Granada, right? All around the times of Rome and all of that. Look. So the Roman Empire ended in 1453. The Holy Roman Empire, though, went all the way up to 1806. Why? Because again, it was us connected to us over here doing our thing. That's why we separated from them. Because the rule of us comes from a different line. We come from a ruling force, ruling factions who have appellations, not names. You understand? Our appellation happens to also be our title. So our title should always be precede us. You know what I'm saying? So that's why we you know what I mean, add that to the name and all of that, because that's what puts us in position. You know what I'm saying? But the Moorish kingdom itself, the Moorish Empire itself, right? That's why they don't want you getting into Cleopatra and all of this stuff. Because again, it brings you right back to what I'm saying about the monarchy, why they turned you against so-called imperialism. You know what I mean? Cleopatra, right? Who was the Philopatra, right? Right? Marcus Antonius, right? Who was one of the triumvirates of Rome. They get together. They have Selene, right? Of Mauritania. Where's Mauritania? That's over here. That's in the same place we was looking at, Old Mexico, with Mount Moriah and all that shit is, right? They have Alexander Helios, right? Because remember, these is also Egyptians. Cleopatra, or the last Cleopatra, is closer to you in time than she was to the time of them actually building the pyramids, right? So this is like not too long ago, is what I'm saying. These people. And that Mauritania, that kingdom, those kingdoms over there, that was what was over here. And Alexander Helios, right? That's why they found all that stuff in the Grand Canyon. They had Drusilla. Drusilla had Juliarina, right? Of Emesa, right? Mesa is like Musa, right? Which is like Moses. Then boom, the high priest Gallius, high priest of Anu, Gallius, Julius Alexio. She gets with Drusilla. They then have Silas, right? Longinus comes. Then Queen of Armenia, King of Armenia, Primus Agrippa, right? Now put a pin in that. Take that out. Oh, yeah. So dude on Facebook, big up to him, Modern Day Prophet. He did this thing on it. This image which illustrates what I'm talking about. So all of this, like I said, by way of Cleopatra coming through Mauritania. Therefore, when they talk about the Moors and all of that being associated with the Moors of the ancient so-called Egyptian, this is what ties us into all of that. You know what I'm saying? Not only by blood, but by title, based upon her being the unifier between so-called Egypt and Rome. See, that's why we were able to inherit everything after the collapse of the Roman so-called dictatorship and put the niggas into the freezer under what they call the Dark Ages for so long. So it wasn't until they married in enough, or we thought they were civilized enough, that they then could get access to their titles back. You understand? Because they had to be basically bled back into the line in order for them to get that strain of the Hereshef, of the bloodlust and all of that shit out. Because we was already dealing with that by maintaining the societies through the covenants that we had made as Moors, i.e., high priests, who were marrying into all of these families, you see what I'm saying, and thus sanctifying them, which is why they always had to come back and marry back in, or fight their way back into our territories, back into our lives. Understand? That's why everybody in the world keep coming back here. That's why everybody in the world, in Japan, these niggas is trying to straighten their hair and do all types of shit, you know what I mean? To get afros and locks. Like this is what this is coming from. They are literally all our children, and they want to act like they not. But everything they do, the level, like we don't imitate. I mean, there are elements of us that do imitate them, but we don't imitate them to the point that they do us. That's only really been a modern phenomenon. You can kind of also chart it with the deterioration of our women. You know what I'm saying? Because everybody you gotta understand, everybody has everything the so-called original women going through now. We already went through that 30, 40, 50, for 50 years, we as original men like that. So we already have created pathways and shit around all of that. This is the first time they experiencing this. And we told them while it was happening to us, but they were being received. They were being given accolades and stuff like that above us. So now the tables is turning, and you got to deal with it now, because this is what you said you wanted. So the only way out is the way in, by understanding stuff like this, because this allows you now to shut all of this other stuff down. That's why they want to keep saying that the Cleopatra was white and all this other type of stuff. But Cleopatra was a title, right? The title of Cleopatra basically ended when Selene of Mauritania, right, becomes so-called queen with Alexander of Helios of Egypt, right? Which again is in the grand parts of the Grand Canyon, parts of the South, parts of the Midwest, parts of Florida, wherever there was dominion at. Because you see on the line, look, after that, you don't see Cleopatra no more. Because after that, it was absorbed into the ancient Mauritanian royalty of the ancient Mauritanian peoples, who were now consolidated themselves under this joint empire, thus creating this union that basically led to the creation of the so-called United States of America, which again is what? A union, right? Set up by monarchies to come off or be run like a corporation, run like countries, but really they corporate estates being run by decoy administrators. That's why. So when they talk about where's the money's coming. It's us. I'm showing you. This is us. We are the descendants, the inheritors of all of this, because of us being born here and being this hue and having this type of ridicule and persecution. That's how you know it's not them. Look, this the Grand Canyon stuff. That's what I'm talking about. See that? This is melted rock. This essentially is technically what it probably looks like. Look like Petra. All of this was destroyed in whatever happened. So look, the line of Cleopatra. I've gone to Cleopatra's Needle in in Central Park, across the street, and across from the museum. We used to go there all the time. Build in front of it, do in what you call it, pour libations in front of it. One night we went there mad late. We saw them doing a ritual inside of the damn tomb, Egyptian space they had in there. They had the candles and all that shit. We looking at them from the outside, from the needle side. They told us, oh, they brought that down. They had to hollow out a boat. They got a whole story about it. I didn't read it in the museum. I read it in the Masonic library they have on 21st. Brother Dawood, peace be upon him, was able to bring me up in there and read all of that. They showed all of the lithograph drawn pictures of the shit. I was like, they just moved this from one part of the city and just put it there. But it's a straight obelisk. But ask yourself this: if the obelisk was set up to represent the phallus of who the Europeans would call Pindar, or who would represent Osiris, why would they erect one to Cleopatra, who is a female? Cleopatra, associated with the name Cleopatra's Needle. Cleopatra's obelisk, New York City's famous ancient obelisk, that arrived at Central Park 130 years ago. See that? So right when the empire, right when stuff went south for us, these niggas was telling us that they was able to stop the wars that they was fighting, cut down an obelisk from Egypt, open up a boat, put the obelisk on the boat, almost have the obelisk and the boat sink multiple times, have to cut the boat open once they finally make it and dock it. People allegedly died on the trip, had to cut the boat open to take the obelisk out and somehow or another put it back up in a way that without the cornerstone allow it to stand up to this day. It's a lie. Remember, the original people in the northeast corner of the so-called United States was speaking Tutese. They were speaking Tut, the so-called Tut language, which is the old Mi'kmaq language, which is the ancient Egyptian language. So unless these Moors that's out here calling themselves Indians and stuff is speaking Tut or Tutese or have a element or direction of that, you got to look at it kind of thing, because them people was considered as Egyptians and so-called tribe members of the tribes of Israel, as you can see. Jersey and New Jersey. The island of New Jersey was formerly called Caesarea, and the colony of New Jersey was initially called Nova Caesarea, in Latin for the name of the region. So New Jersey, right? Doesn't it say right here? Caesarea, right? Or Caesarea is the feminine version of Caesar. So Jersey means Caesar because it's named after Mark Antony, who was one of the Caesars, you understand, who had a son. They had a son. That son was Ptolemy Philadelphus. Ptolemy Philadelphus. When we research when Philadelphia was founded, they saying that it was founded when William Penn got there. But William Penn and them only came with basic supplies. So how did they build all of the cities and everything that we know as Pennsylvania, Philadelphia? How did he and them build that? Why would the king go into an agreement through him with Moors? They were called the Delaware Moor. They were referring to them as the Moors. They only called them Delaware because that was the dude who was initially brokering the deal. And they named it on their side for him. But they were called the Moors, period, because they were the Moors in America who made this deal, because they already had the stuff there. And that was the old capital that had been set up from the days of even before Ptolemy, because it basically was named for Philadelphus, for him. So when we talk about old Rome, old Egypt, old Jerusalem, all of this stuff is here. We're living in it right now. We just, you know what I'm saying? We just ain't know. We just ain't figure it out, man. The Spain cities like Zaragoza, founded as the Colonia Caesarea Augusta. See, Caesar Augustus. This is the land acquired by Caesar. Caesarea is believed to evolve by Norba Caesarina and have names linked to Caesars. Caesarea is also known as the town in Spain with the local legend connecting it to Julius Caesar. France and Italy, the Forum Julii or the Phrygius, right? So all of this, again, is showing and proving how much we are waking up to who and what we really are and where we've been. So when they talk about, oh, you can get to the Grand Canyon by walking, get to Africa by walking through the Grand Canyon, that's how a lot of these people getting over here. How you think they getting past ice and all of this? Because they know the ancient roots that was cut off from us. But that's why we had the military, that we would do flybys and all that stuff to stop these niggas from coming over here trying to get on, trying to invade. You read about the technology, right? So, trying to find that picture. Oh, yeah. Like, why would European kings want to marry into savage families? Don't make sense. Because it didn't happen like that. So, like I said, at one point, the world was such that you could walk from one part of the world to the other, just like in Lord of the Rings. That's what all of that was about. Funny fact, Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings, hated the Roman Empire. He hated it in his writings. All because he said they were fake virtuous. They acted like they had all of this mobile valor because of how they were able to die, but their average everyday culture really didn't exist. It existed by taking over other people's stuff and absorbing their stuff into theirs. That's why Roman Latin was so poor. That's why the sanitation and stuff that they would do was so poor. And a lot of the stuff that is dedicated to Romans actually was done by the Etruscans, the Levantines, the Carthaginians, and everybody else that wasn't Romans. The Romans was just able to come up due to their connection to the Ethiopian royalty of the day, whom helped them build up some of the first colleges in Italy, because that was a colony of Sabia, i.e. Abyssinia, through the Queen of Sheba, who were the queens of Seba or Saba. Bled el Seba means those outside of the sultan's or the king's or the emperor's jurisdiction. Bled el Meskin are those people on the inside of that. Yeah, the New Jersey flag, yeah. The Bunker Hill flag, yep. So you see, this is a technologically advanced society that has harnessed both technological degrees and architecture to harness energy to fuel machines. You understand? It's basically a vehicle. That's why everything they got is they getting it from us. Primitive mean advanced. Always remember that. Primitive shit is always more advanced than the modern shit. Hicks stated that during the first 2 years of the Creek-Cherokee War, the Cherokees captured thousands of Creeks who were either burned to death or sold as slaves in Charleston, South Carolina. After the Creeks organized into a single confederacy, there was a stalemate, but after the Great Smallpox Plague, see, biological weapons they using. In 1730s, the Cherokees were always on the defensive. In the last year of the war, 1754, many Cherokees were killed in a battle and most of their villages were burned. Ultimately, the Cherokees lost all the lands they had won when they signed a peace treaty with the Creeks. The Creeks The Dutch was all the Moors. That's the Great Creek Confederacy. That's the old Moorish Turkish Confederacy that was able to reorganize after Grenada and then come out as a military force that then swept all the dominions that these niggas had gained from 1492 to about 50-55, and then started blocking all of these niggas generationally up in plantations as prisoners of war or galley slaves. It's called the Kepra Nagast. You can get that. Also, research the 25 kings of ancient Mesopotamia. The kings list from ancient Mesopotamia that goes back before the foundation of Urdu, which technically was the first city. Those texts basically show you, when you read that, like I said, with the Upapishtam and the Ramayana and things like that, you start to see that there was this confederacy of these ancient demigod type peoples. And through various genetic wars, they basically reconsolidated themselves in the genetic seed of other peoples, all so that way they could leapfrog themselves through time, right? And then come back to continue the war against their original enemy, who is their own people, who were trying to bond themselves with outdated entity, non-corporeal spirits that were now that could only be brought into physical through some sort of incantation, blood ritual, things like that. You understand? There were formerly in America, as now, tribes of all complexions, as elsewhere, yellowish, olive, coppery, tawny, reddened, brown, incarnate, or white, which is albino, and even blackened or negro-like. Tall and dwarfish men from 8 to 4 feet in size, called giants, and pygmies, men with various frames, skulls, features of all sorts found in the Eastern Hemisphere. Yep. And we govern all of that. All them niggas. Because we're the only ones verified that had international trade during all of these epochs of time. There's no verification that the people who came to be known as Cherokees had any international sway outside of the point of when they became slaves and vassals to the so-called Romans, who had reorganized themselves now as United States citizens, right? So we're always dealing with the same thing. That's what we just got to realize. We're not dealing with a new enemy. It's always the same thing. The enemy got the same play. The devil don't change. The era changes. And thus he tries to make you forget all of the strides you made in the last era against it. You see? And so they try to redistribute it and put you back into it. When you ain't never left, you've been in the same place. They just been flipping the furniture. So we used to have to literally look in niggas' mouths, check people out for dysentery and smallpox and all that stuff that they was infecting their African prisoners of war. Because once the Moorish Empire in Africa fell, which I would say technically was the Monotopian Empire that we talked about last week, that's when the Portuguese was able to use all of those resources, funnel all of those people into them under Christianity, and start using them as mercenaries against us. And that's what they did. That's what happened. That's how a lot of these so-called black people that you talk about got imported in Africa. That's how they wound up here. Look at the difference. Look at everybody who got on fezzes and turbans and barnooses and all of this. Look at the people who don't. See the difference? See the difference? This is what I'm saying. When you look at the old images of Bama and Pak, you see the people who got all of the turbans and the headdress and stuff, they standing. All of the people that they had shut down for trying to invade them, they all at the bottom on the floor, tied up. Look, Granada, regnum, which means what? King, regent, lord, ruler. You know what I'm saying? Like all of this is our stuff. All of this was already here. Those places across the water are the colonies and stuff, ancient colonies that have been repurposed over the years as bastions that we would use during our campaigns. And eventually we wound up leaving for good, and they just set up themselves in there. And now they got their history around it. And now they telling us how it happened. See? But go there in your Moorish habit with this type of information. see what and see what happened. See how they talk to you. Because I've done it. I've done it. You know what I mean? And it's glorious. Because they're so used to you taking an inferior position that it's nothing for them to constantly feel like they have dominion over you and can just talk to you any type of way. And it's all good. Because again, you have no culture. You have no this. You was brought over from somewhere. You was this. You was that. But yet still everybody dressing like you. Everybody talking like you. Everybody trying to sing like you. From the Koreans to the K-pops to all of these. These niggas is buying up real American artist catalogs. The people who are buying them the most are Asians. Those are the people copying you the most right now. Looking horrible. Looking crazy. You know what I'm saying? Looking crazy. But hey, let them do that. Because they're all trying to tie themselves back to the vine without you knowing it. They done already convinced the original woman that she's supposed to procreate with everybody else now. She the only one that realized everybody in the world want her man but her. But she got to come to that realization herself. You've been talking to her for 50, 60 years. At least since Claudine came out. You know what I mean? And then they don't get it. So now your boy is making it impossible for you to be able to get along by yourself. Because them degrees don't mean nothing. More original women in corporate America lost their job in the past 3 months than any other group in history. That's the most educated, the most housings, the most ones with the most housing, the most this, the most that. They was the first to go. What does that tell you, B? What does that tell you? Everybody think that this thing is about this whole thing about abortion and taking women's rights and all of this stuff. Well, this has nothing to do with that. This is about white males striving to bring their female back to heel. Because their female wants to procreate with us. Like every other female on the planet. This is not arrogance. This is data. This is data you can research yourself. Why else would the Japanese government want to pay original American men, heterosexual men, money to $75,000 a pop per kid? Why would they do that? And why single us out? The ones with no culture, with no nothing. Because we're the original owners, the original makers, owners, rulers of the planet Earth, father of civilization, God of the universe. That's how it always was. Like that old video I showed you with Granny. She said we let them come up in here, but we shut the men down, and they had sex with their women and made all of these different people. And then all of these people, all these different races now trying to side with their slave mothers. You know what I'm saying? And look what happened. This is an example of it right here. Look, this is a gift. This is a sterling silver gift given to the Queen of the Pamunkey Nation from the King of England and Scotland in silver. Look, to the Queen of the Pamunkey. Look, got the crown on it and everything. This is government to government. This is them becoming upon. Look, between His Most Serene Majesty, the Prince Charles II, by grace of King of England, boom, 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 from the Indian kings and queens, concluded in 1677. The Indian kings and queens they talking about is the Moors. The members of the British East India Company, who were shareholders in the Morocco Company, who were founders of the Barbary Company. This is about money and bloodline and keeping you out of it so they can continuously use it as a vessel of wealth for them. This ain't got nothing to do with us. We're royalty in every place on the planet. The Fez is accepted royalty, customary headgear on everywhere in the planet. That's why you don't see niggas wearing it like that. The only ones you see wearing it like that is us and the Moroccans, bro. They're the only people you see doing that. They pattern everything after us, man. The Moors was getting busy always, like shutting armies and stuff down all over the world up until like the 30s, 40s, 50s, like maybe 50s is when it started toning down. That's when all of the Moors started coming back home from the war. And these white people who was descended from these people, right, who was now taking over, right, while we was away, they done now came over, took over shit, and now look what happened. They now are the landlords because they done set up a coup d'etat to break out of all of the jails that we had them in. Then they took over the halls of justice and all of that between the 60s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And it made us think that we was outside of it, and then pushed us all to the outer rims of the society, which became the ghettos. Then they created fake laws to keep us from getting the titles and everything back, and got enough Negro Freemasons to help them in the transition. And then the Negro Freemasons, who had their own jurisdiction in their own stuff or whatever, now had to be elected in the democracy when they was already ruling in the republic. You understand? This is facts. Meanwhile, the people that call themselves the Native Americans, the feather wearing dudes, and all these people, a lot of them are descending from those clans and those tribes again of those who tried to integrate with the white mulatto, Mangroom, Octoroon, Mestizo Cherokees against their own people. And now they became federally recognized Indians because the United States is now coined the term, trademarked it, copyrighted, and made all them niggas wards of the state. That's why they was nowhere around during the civil rights movement, even though it was initiated on their behalf through the original Rainbow Coalition, which was all about the so-called autochthon American, so-called Indian and Moorish groups that were fighting for their own land back based upon the stuff, again, that the prophet initiated. They get a Shriner, so-called Cherokee nigga, Jesse Jackson, to come through and then hijack the Rainbow Coalition and turn it into a multi so-called race immigrant gay organization funded by the ADL, right? Protected legally by the JDL and funded by the CIA. This is all facts, right? They used Toni Morrison. They used Angela and Maya Angelou, Nikki Giovanni, Alice Walker. Used all of these horrible, self-hating, black people hating people to write all of this dribble and all of these fake stories about how horrible it was to be with a black man and all of that to help foster these women going into government assistance. Read the book by Alice Walker daughter. She lay it all out for them niggas. She lay it out for you. She said, no, this woman only had me to prove that a white man could love and have a baby with a black woman. After that, she really didn't want to have nothing to do with me. This is her quote from her book about this bitch. So they all was like that. And what did they all have in common? They all Eastern Stars. They all parts of the Daughters of the American Revolution. They all part of it. So that's that. Understand? But yeah, the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians explored and settled the northwestern Morocco shores in ancient times. Again, us. The ubiquitous Romans, after founding Tingis near the site of modern Tangiers, eventually went to settle north of the Sable River and found Tamuda and the mountains near Tetuan, Lixus, and outside the Larchere, Manasseh, near Solok Arba and Del Arbe. But those alien peoples either had been absorbed into the native Berber populations through intermarriage or had been swept away altogether when the first Arab conquerors overran the northwestern corner of Africa in the 7th and 8th centuries after Christ. The Arabs did not conquer Morocco. You understand? With one sword in one hand and one and the Quran in the other. So this is what I'm saying. We were given again one version of the history based upon where we was from, but throughout the world we was kicking everybody's ass pretty much up until, like I said, 1900s, and that's when it all started flipping, and that's when a lot of the stuff started happening. But there's more than enough documentation of us in Spain, Europe, all over the world as Moors in the modern world, unified doing stuff. That's why they didn't want to see no more Moors coming into this type of understanding, and why the Prophet's Temple had to go through all the stuff that it went through, and why it's going through the stuff it's going through today. However, like I said, one monkey don't stop no show, and all of this stuff is continuously moving towards a crescendo. So these people use the book to enslave everybody. So in that, they've enslaved themselves to their book. So they going through all this antichrist stuff and all this stuff. They don't believe none of that shit, but they believe it enough to get you to believe it, to keep it going for them. So that means that it's not their belief that's keeping this thing going. It's yours. It's always been yours. It's never been them. That's why they need us to be from somewhere else and not be from where we at. Like in LA, they'll be like, where you from? Right? And you'll say, oh, I'm from such and such avenue, same place you from, right? But that's not what they think. That's not how they look at it. They want to know where your granny from, because that's where you really from, because that's where you came up. That's where you had to go when your moms wasn't things. So that's how you look at it. So whatever neighborhood granny was at, that's really how they consider you being from there. That's where you really from. You just live here with us now. You understand? That's tribalism. You did? That's tribalism. We Moors, we overcame that by having a title system, see, that was initiated through the bloodline. So that way, nobody could actually dominate somebody else. So we put in protocols in play with each other through peerage that allowed that to happen. Our cousins in them, right, or descendants in them who came to be known as, let's say, melanated European Christian royalty or Asian Tartarian type royalty, they seen that, right, and then adopted their versions of it, which became known as heraldry or chivalry. You see? Customary way by which nobles address one another and conduct business. We're the foundation of that. That's why when you look at a lot of these old images of these Moors from Europa and shit like that, a lot of these niggas look like they from here, because they was. We've been saying this forever. We was from over here, went over there, hooked everything up, set up a whole society, whatever. Then once we reached a certain age, we left, came back over here, and lived in luxury and peace until them niggas messed up everything we had over there. And then they followed us back over here. But now we couldn't keep them out because they was related. You understand? That's abandonment now. You can't have a baby with some chick and then bouncing, and you know what I'm saying? You used to could get away with all that. You can't do that now. So that's what this is about. So yeah, we'll use paintings, we'll use statues, we'll use lithographs, we'll use anything to show and prove and keep beating in your head the same thing that I've been saying. Same thing that all the white people saying now and everybody else. You can't tie me to no sovereign citizen, none of that bullshit. You can't tie me to none of the shit that these niggas is doing, B. Can't tie you to none of that.
Because none of that has anything to do with what we're talking about. What we're talking about is reestablishing your estate and your stuff and all that stuff now lawfully. Because that's really the only way we should have been doing it from the beginning. But all of these niggas been using and been praying to all of these type of demons. Like they'll talk to you about Baal and all that, but they won't talk to you about Agrabat, what Agrat, Bat, Mahalat, and Abaddon, and all of these ones that they really serving. They can't because they're so intent on these things becoming physical again that they don't have a means of controlling the outcome anymore. So they've tied themselves to the opposite of what they see that want to manifest. So they already know they cook, but they have devotees, right, that live amongst us, and all them niggas want to they don't want to tell their followers they're not doing that, because then they'll stop doing the rituals. They'll stop doing the sacrifices. They'll stop kidnapping the babies. So they got to talk to these niggas like they still got a chance to win. And they not. They losing. They lost. Look at the Epstein shit. Look at how deep that is. They don't have a choice anymore. Now it's gonna come out because y'all done made it something that it really didn't have to be. We already know. But y'all talking about that. I want to see Frazzle Drip. I want to see the Samina Aman and Hillary Clinton face ripping tape. That's the one we really nobody talking about. That's what I feel like they keep talking about, the Epstein tape to take people away from. One where they torturing the children. I mean, I don't want to see the torture of the children, but I'm saying that's what people really need to see. But they're not going to do that. They're going to keep people wrapped up with this for another 3 years. When all you got to do is go on the dark web, you see everything. Get the history of the American nations. Like all this, all of this stuff was already done. The prophet did that heavy lifting. And almost everybody since him been trying to redo or remake or try to cast doubt or say this or whatever about him, but he's the only American prophet worth his salt. That's why we never heard about him until it was too late. Brigham Young, the Mormons, that all of that is based on them living as Moors, trying to live like us. Everything they do is about mocking and imitating us and doing what we do and turning it on the head. Once you understand that, but once you get the nationality straight, the spirituality comes right behind it. Because now you're always aware of the place, so you never caught off guard. You always in your proper person. You always know who they talking about. Because you know what these words mean. You understand? You know. So there's nobody talking to you, because man knows not for being told. You know, you don't believe. Like I'm showing you images, like I showed you an image, a list of American kings. So now nobody can say that there was no kings in America. So when you see that image of Shango Macho holding all of the gold and the crystals and all of that, that's one of the kings. But to say America had kings would then say America's had governments and a monarchy and all that, and they want to downplay that. Why? Because citizens of the United States cannot have titles of nobility. So if you're born here and you have a title of nobility, that means you cannot be a citizen of the United States. You can only be an American or a national who has allegiance to the state by which you were born. And that state is Islam, right? Protected by the so-called Constitution, right? Right? Can no Muslim do that? Can they? Not like us. Nobody can do it like us. That's why they not like us. That's why everything they do, they try to mock, man. When was the Church of Satan founded and all of that? Y'all know, right? Well, it was founded what, in the 60s? 60s, 70s, right? 1970s. Anton LaVey. Like there's a conspiracy that says Andrew Tate is really Anton LaVey. There's a conspiracy that says that's really him, but who knows? Yeah. Anybody else? Well, when they say like the flag, right? They say the Moorish flag, right? He says a certain type of years old or whatever. I think what everybody gets twisted is that he's talking about the positioning of the flag more than the symbol on it. Because there's a difference between a pentacle and a pentagram. You understand? A pentacle, right, is what you see is what you see on the left. Excuse me, a pentagram is what you see on the left. A pentacle is what you see on the right. When you see that picture of the prophet and he's sitting in the office, he doesn't have the Moroccan flag, right? He has the Moorish flag, right? He said the Moorish flag is 10,000 years. The Satanists, again, adopted what the Europeans buried, put the goat, which is Capricorn, right, as the center, right, and then circumscribed the energy for it, correct? What? When was Prophet Noble Jarley's birthday? Anybody? January 8th, right? Right. What sign? What's the zodiac sign for January? Anybody know? Capricorn. Right, right. And Capricorn is a what? Is a goat, right? Is a goat, right? And when the prophet died, they tried to list him after everything he did, right? They tried to list him as black, right? Even though we know he's, Moorish or melanated, correct? Correct, right? So this, what you see here on the left, was really the Freemasons mocking Prophet Noble Ali by getting his children, the declared and undeclared Moors, to go into black orders ruled by the goat. See what I'm saying? That would actually lead them astray and put them in a constant cycle, right? Which is circle of being black under the jurisdiction of white, not realizing that their true flag is just over here in its proper sense. Understand? Again, another scam against the man, because they know that the original goat riders, people who had to ride the goat, for instance, were marched across the hot Arabian desert into the caves of West Asia, as was told, right, by us, was them. Yeah. So the whole satanic movement, the way that they set their whole thing up, again, from the image all the way down to how they do their whatever, was all based on the Moorish Sons of America. Look at the robes these Moors got on. These the same robes that Anton LaVey and them niggas was wearing at the Church of Satan, which became the OTO, the Lima, and all of the stuff that Puffy and all the rest of these niggas is into now. That they use Crowley to influence actual Freemasons to get into fake magic and pagan magic. When people like Eliphas Levi and the people above him, one of the ones they never talk about is a dude named John Yarker. And John Yarker was the real one who was really trying to get all of the old Moorish science and stuff like that. And he would teach almost anybody, unfortunately, because he just wanted the shit out there. John Yarker set up one of the highest orders. There's only two high orders in their stuff outside in the natural stuff that that they let you into, which is the Order of the Trapezoid and the Order of Memphis and Mizraim. That's the order of the Egypt and the Hebrews. His name is John Yarker. Yarker. He was the head adept that led to. His last name is Yarker. His first name is John. Anybody have any questions? So yeah, the satanic movement, all of that shit is a scam. Most of these so-called modern religions, they all scams because they all being run by Freemasons, unfortunately. So don't sweat it. Anybody else have any questions? Pagan, meaning anybody who builds graven images to worship themselves through, instead of creating the images as means of technological ether-based functions. You know what I'm saying? That really to me is what dictates pagan. It's what they set it up as. You know what I mean? So to them, anybody that's not Christian is pagan. You understand? But that's not true. Pagan is anybody that's striving to carry on the old pagan ways, which were blood and child sacrifice of human beings to satiate the appetite of non-physical beings. So anybody doing that is a pagan. So Holy Communion, paganism. You understand? Blood rites, cutting chickens and shit open, paganism. You know what I'm saying? It's just another type of belief. It's just another type of science. It's just that science, right? With the coming of the Moors, with the overcoming or the so-called acceptance of Yeshua, let's say, right, on a mass thing as one mass sacrifice that forgave everybody from that point on from doing that. Just like when the prophet came, it forgave everybody from having to be Freemasons and put apes and shit off from that point on, but they still kept doing it. You see? And that's the problem. So we wasn't with that because we're about Islamism, which is understanding God in man. God is the highest aspiration. God is the intention, right? But is the highest self of man. Man is the lowest aspect of so-called God, which is the all in all, which is the formation. That's why we don't follow the mystery gods. Not mystery like, oh, what does this mean, blah, 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 but mystery like mystery system gods. You understand? Those gods coming out of mystery systems. Because all of those are manipulated by the priests. And all of those priests are pagans who ultimately are bloodsuckers of the poor, who take everybody's stuff and act like they made it and then create blood rituals so that way the shit they serve can eat. Now those priests have become technocrats. And now the beast that they're feeding, the demons that they serve now, which is the D-Wave computers, the AIs and stuff, that's who they want to bring in. So this right here is another example of a king of America, right? Connected to the old Creeks that we read about, who were the Barbary Moors, who shut down the fake Cherokees after they tried to wipe out the Tslaves and the Ananawea and all of the rest of them. Of which, as you see, I'm of descent. So go into the Chickamauga Confederacy, read about that. Check out Brother Chickamauga's page, Brother PNF page, Brother James page, Mr. James page, Duchess of York, Moors in America, Paris, Canaan Land, any of those types of Moors that's really showing and proving, man. And then, like I said, when it comes to individual stuff, if you want to hit me up about that, you can do so at houseofl@hotmail.com. You can reach me there. You could also hit me up if anybody wants to leave a donation. You can do so. Money sign through Cash App, money sign, capital DS 418. Definitely check that out. Please check out www.aseertheducateers.com as well as www. Let me get it. For newer stuff, I'm gonna be updating some stuff soon as well. I'm working on some projects. Big up to Brother Red Wolf and the Nation. Yeah, I'm gonna be doing some Noble Networking stuff soon. Some other Moors that's doing stuff. So yeah, check that out, please, if you haven't already. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Definitely subscribe if you haven't already to ADOT app as well as CordobaOrganics.com. Definitely appreciate it. Queen definitely appreciates it as well. Everybody that's been supporting over the years. And trying to think if there was anything else. Yeah, so look for a lot of people getting up out of here. And if he's talking about America is only going to be for pure-blooded Americans, the only people that is us. So for all you know, these niggas might be trying to deport themselves. You don't know. You don't know. So, like I said, just remember everything started when it ended. So from the Younger Dryas, we could kind of detect all the way up to now. Big up to Prince Afrique. You get this book, it gets into all of that. And this is what I was saying. The Younger Dryas and all of that stuff happened. And out of that came the American nations, the Moorish American nations, or the ancient Mauritanian nations, who they also refer to as the Canaanites. And then they did their thing. And then analogous to them while they was away across the world, eventually becoming Carthaginians or Phoenicians. And over here you have Paleo Indians, and then you have Corral Supe, and then you have the Chaco, the Chaco people, and then you have, and all of this is before the Olmecs. These people up to Mars even before the Olmecs. You know what I'm saying? So by the time you get to the Olmecs, you understand, this is all ancient technology that's been recycled and reused and repurposed by whatever descendant or remnant or relative that's coming into it. So by the time Caucasians started coming into it, you understand, it was already a wrap. So all we need to do is build up our estates, declare our nationalities and stuff properly now, and make a proper delineation between us and the fiction that was created at the time of our birth. And then, again, unify that vis-a-vis through a great temple, you know what I mean? And start securing all your assets as a noble, as a royal, which affords you constitutionally protected rights, the same way it would any other noble with limited diplomatic immunity. It's just that enforcing that goes a certain way, and there's been so much stuff poisoned in the well, people don't know how to really do it. So it's slow and steady win the race instead of hurry up and get it done, is what I'm saying. You know what I mean? It's not about you becoming a royal and then pissing on everybody and creating another class of Negro. You go from European to Negro peon. We're not trying to do none of that. That's why this ain't for everybody. Like the prophet said, if you can't tear it up, it'll tear you up. So instead of tearing each other up, let's reunify. Let's do what we can and support one another when we can, instead of striving to get caught up in meandering arguments based on outdated modes of self-identification. You know what I mean? So, Islam, again, thank you guys for the support. And if anything else, you can hit me up again at houseofbell@hotmail.com. Peace.